Hello, hello. We will get started in just a moment. Letting folks trickle in whatever time they are on their day. You should be able to drop some comments in the chat. If you could just help me make sure that feature is working, because I want to make sure that we can although we are in webinar mode, which is not my favorite, that we can actually communicate to one another via the Zoom chat. Welcome, welcome. Great. We will wait about a minute or so, a minute more, letting folks land here from their days. I hope your day so far has been going well. Mine came with a bit of an extra adventure of getting locked outside of my office momentarily. Excellent. Okay. We will get started, and as folks join, that is great. I know some folks needed to catch the recording, so we've got that recording going for everyone. Hello, my name is Kristen. I do professional learning for Tuva, as well as many other hats that I wear throughout the rest of the week. And today we're here to talk about how to dive into climate topics using real world data. So leveraging this amazing resource that the Tuva content team has put together. As a bit of an overview of where we're going to go in the next hour, we're going to kick things off and sort of orient to what we are doing and what we will be using. I will share out a little bit more about this in just a quick moment. We'll do some activities throughout. So I've tried to set this up that although we're in webinar, you're going to be jumping in, you'll be working on things, I'll be demoing things. We'll be going live through and getting our hands dirty, as we might say, mucking about diving into these data. So we've got a kickoff activity, sort of meeting some of the weather data sets and the climate data sets and how we can think about using that in our classroom with our learners. And then where do we go from here, right? An hour goes by really quickly. Hopefully it goes by quickly. Hopefully it doesn't feel like it's dragging on and long, but it's only helpful and valuable if we can actually move forward from that hour. So we are going to be diving in to one of the new collections that the Tuva Science content team has put together. And it is the climate collection for middle school. So the way that you can navigate to that is that when you are logged into your Tuva account and you can come up to the content library, this will show up and you over here. So if tradition, like typically probably you go here, like somewhere in the science libraries, to find different resources that are related to your specific grade levels and subject area and even what unit you're working on, what performance expectation you want your students to be working on. But Tuva is building out these collections of batching a bunch of our activities and data stories and data sets that are around certain themes. And this, for the next hour, we're going to be exploring some within this climate collection for middle school. So when we dive into it, and you know what, I will put the direct link for this collection in the Zoom chat. So you can just click right on that and hopefully it'll take you there. So there are 4 different sections within this collection that are getting built out. I will say, like, some are there and they've got some richness things, and some are coming. This is a work in progress. We are continuing to build this based on what's in our broader content library to populate this specific collection, as well as what we're hearing back from users of what they're interested in, what they're looking for, and things like that. So section 1 is Earth's climate systems, excuse me. And as you can see, there are a bunch of different already existing. You can find them in the content library, but it requires some searching for them. And what we're trying to do with these collections is make it an easier one-stop come here to get a variety of activities and data stories, and as I said, data sets that you can play with. Most of these are actually the activities in the data story, so it's just like ready to go right into your classroom and you can run with it. So we've got the Earth's climate system, explore global change, climate innovations, and human dimensions. And those last two, as I said, are the two that are coming soon. And by soon, I mean like in the next couple of weeks. We're just, the ball's moving quickly and we want to get things to you. So we're going to be diving in and exploring some of these different activities and data stories. As you can see, as I go through, there is a lot here. So we certainly cannot explore all of them in the next hour, but this is grounding what we want to focus on bringing this big topic of climate and understanding what a climate is and how climate works, how it is similar but different from weather, and how we can really get our students sort of diving in and chewing on some of those topics using this amazing plethora of real world data that we have at our disposal for this topic area. So this webinar is designed for you to be able to embrace your inner adult learner hat. So we recognizing fully 100% that we always have our teacher hat on all the time, and we will be forever thinking of that. But I also encourage you to jump in yourself and play around with the data and take a look at it and see how it goes. So as we're getting started and settling in, I've got a couple questions for us to think about as we're kind of shifting out of teaching mode where we've been all day and into this next, hour or so, 55 minutes that we have together where we can learn about potential resources or opportunities that we have to bring to our own learners. I've got two questions. You can respond to one or to both of them, whichever you would prefer. The question is, what aspects of real world connections do your students struggle with most? And because we're here for like middle school science and climate, like you can put that bend on it. But if that's too specific, that's why I left the question a bit more broad and vague. Or sorry, not vague, but sort of more open-ended, I should say. The second question is, what strategies are you using now to make your middle school science, your climate science, your whatever the unit is that you're in right now, learning more relevant, authentic, and engaging for your learners? So I'm going to pause for about a minute so that we can reflect and think out. I encourage you to share in the chat. You do not need to, but I do encourage you to pause and think about one or both of these questions as it relates to your learners and your working with your learners. Great. I know typically we do not usually come to a webinar and then pause and have those moments, but I think it's helpful. There's so many hats that we wear to pause and think about what's actually the reality for my learners and where they're coming from. So what's grounding this effort, besides this really cool collection that we've put together at Tuva with the intention to help you with your learners get at this big, huge topic of climate, But what guides all of the work that we do at Tuva as a supplemental resource towards science curriculum is coming from this perspective that scientific knowledge is based on clear, convincing thinking about data. Or maybe said a different way, when we are teaching our science, there's a lot that we need to do. There's a lot that we are being asked to do. And those of us that live in NGSS states, we hear a lot about the 3 dimensions of teaching in terms of the like practices, the core ideas, and the cross-cutting concepts of all of these things. But really, data is what we use in science to understand things. So data is what was used to understand what we have learned across eons of making sense of phenomenon and the world around us and how the world works. Like everything we've learned to date across all of our different science disciplines, data is what we have used. And data are what we use for the how we have learned that, which is that what and the how are the 2 things that we are asked to teach to our students simultaneously. Oh my goodness, that is a lot that we are being asked to do. But we really feel that data is this core piece of helping our students get at an understanding of what's already known, as well as learning how we discover new information about phenomenon as they're doing their own investigations or just broader science literacy to understand how the field understands things. So that comfort and use and understanding of data is really key. And that's what we're going for. It shows up obviously in Appendix F of our science and engineering practices for those of us in NGSS states. But if we go back to also, it shows up in the like Appendix H, which is science for all. So even if we're not in an NGS state, this is relevant, right? We're going for this of helping our students be able to understand that our science findings are limited to what can be answered with evidence. Oftentimes empirical evidence from an experiment, but also like powerful observations that we make from in the field or from correlation studies, things like that. It's based on recognizing patterns, and that as scientists, we use tools and technology to make those measurements and those observations. And that's what we're trying to get at here with Tuva by creating this supplemental program to fit into all of our instructional practices, to make the content more engaging, to provide tools that are user-friendly for the age and competencies of our users in middle school as they are working through something like climate. So we're trying to stitch all these different pieces together. We're trying to create that space so that doing science can be really engaging, and so that they can learn these practices of, well, what graph type should I use? Or how do I analyze the data? How do I start to recognize those patterns in the data? So that's the kind of context of where we're coming from, of we've got this collection, and undergrounding, we've got this theory that we are working off of, or these intentions that we are trying to build out the supports for with it. So let's get into some data. So a component of climate and weather is thinking, and the earth systems and all of these pieces. One question we could ask, of certainly not getting at all of it, but right, this is lots of puzzle pieces have to fit together as we're working through, as we're helping our learners make sense of climate. We might ask a question like, how do daylight hours vary? So we're getting at sort of patterns, daily changes day to day, within a day, maybe seasonal changes, appearances of lengths of day. There's a lot of different moving pieces across multiple different timescales that are going on, and our students need to be able to converse across those different timescales. So a question could be, well, how do daylight hours vary? And we're going to look at some data for that. What I'm going to ask that you do is I'll show you the data. First, you need to figure out, are these data that you can use? Because if I'm showing you data that are not relevant to that question, then that's not very useful, and we can stop right there. So always a good thing to gut check of can I actually use these data to answer the question that I'm interested in? And then based on the data, if you think you can use some of these data to start to get at this question, which data would you use? Which of the variables, or what we here at Tuva call attributes? Which of those might you use? What subset of them? And then how might you graph them? Would you put it in a pie chart? Would you make it into a box plot? Like, how would you actually graph those data? You do not need to graph the data. We're just doing this as a thought experiment of like conceptualizing how we would play with the data to work through the data that we have. So here are the data. The question again, how do daylight hours vary? Here are the data that we have. I'm going to give you a minute and a half. I know that's not a long time, but there's a method to the madness here. So a minute and a half of looking at these data, going through and thinking about, okay, so can you use these data? Which of these data might you use? And then what kind of graph type would you use? So we're going to take a minute and a half to do that, and then we'll come back together and we'll keep moving forward. Okay, awesome. For those of you watching the recording, make sure you pause it for the amount of time that you want to come back through. So what's interesting is that we might not look at these data and think this would be a quick question that we can ask. But this is one of the great data sets that shows up in the content, like in this climate collection, as a precursor step in. And we can jump into it and we can start playing with these data and thinking about, okay, well, how do daylight hours vary? So we could do initially, just sort of right off the bat, is an initial dot plot to get a sense of, oh, wow, like there's a pretty big variation from 4 hours to 22, almost 21 and a half hours, things like that. Whoa, that's a lot. Maybe some of us were thinking about, well, I saw that there were different locations. Does it vary by location? Whoa. Now we're seeing some really interesting things. Like there's a really big difference in terms of the spread or range of daylight hours by the different ones. Let's color code that out by those different locations. Okay, so we're seeing that. Maybe we should color code it by the latitude. Like, are we seeing any changes with latitude as we're coming here? Or maybe is it longitude, right? This is the beauty of where if we're trying to get students to understand, or maybe actually we just want to make a map of all of our data. And so we're going to plot our latitude and our longitude, and we are going to color code it by the hours of daylight, potentially for the different months that we have. And we could start thinking about, oh, okay, there's some differences over time in terms of how many daylight hours there are. So we can use, rather than just sort of stating that our daylight hours vary because of the position of the sun and the earth and how that relates to climate, right? There's a really different climate down in Antarctica and up in Alaska than there is here around the equator. We could say that, or we could have students have these aha moments of, oh, wow, like some things are changing. And so we've packed in to this collection some of those opportunities of a kind of, how do we explore this more deeply? How do we get in and think about how day-to-day varies and how that would influence what kind of climate you might have in different locations around the earth? Okay, so that's kind of a general, like, how can we use some of these activities to dive in? But what about if we just want to really kind of focus in on weather, and we're also really hoping to get our students better practicing the analyzing and interpreting data piece of it? And especially in middle school, we want them to be like representing those linear and nonlinear relationships, getting a sense of what's going on, either by looking at them in table form or through the graphs to reveal patterns. We want them to be considering correlation among variables. We want them to think about how to make sense of what they are seeing and what might be some limitations of what they're seeing. Well, we got a whole host of activities that we can get at that, right? So they're the practices that we need to be teaching across all of our units. And then there's the content, the science content. So how do we bring those together? How do we merge those together? So I've pulled out a couple examples, a couple places that we could play to think about how we can really leverage some of these activities in the collection for getting at those components. So reasoning about seasons, and let's see, reasoning about seasons. We're going to jump in here and find that one. And thinking about, okay, so what is this? How could we play with it? And I'm going to encourage you to do this too. Just as a reminder, when you click into any of the activities, we've got the overview of what's going on, the teacher overview here with the learning objectives of for the instructional designer who designed this specific activity. What were they aiming at? Like all of our activities and our data stories, they are tagged with a bunch of different things, performance expectations, science topics, things like that. Down here where it says activity type guided, many of our science activities are guided, where the students are led step by step through the activity. The other option here is student directed, which is they're pretty wide open questions and the students need to be making a lot more choices. So if you're seeing that and you're sort of curious as to what that is, but again, in this teacher overview, we've got the introduction of the activity and you can look through it here, but to be totally honest, actually, I really like trying it as a student because then that gives me a better sense of like, what is this actually going to look like for my student? So if we were to jump in here and think about, so we get a sense of what this activity is. Our students are going to be creating line graphs to compare mean day length change over the year at 2 locations. Okay, right? So we are going to be comparing. Let's look back at those practices that we're trying to work on. We are making sense. We're interpreting the data and we're looking at the data to reveal patterns. Where did it go? It's right here. We're going to be comparing different line graphs to see what's going on, considering factors that might affect things. So that's getting at that deeper understanding. So we're not just looking at one graph, but it's multiple graphs that we are piecing through and putting together. Geographic factors. Okay. This is what our students see, just as that reminder of like when they jump in. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of demo this a little bit as we go through to think about kind of, okay, so what's in this activity and how has it been designed to really help your students leverage using the data to get at the content area. So first we're gonna filter by location, and we don't want all of these locations. Instead, we want to only display Anchorage, Alaska, and Mexico City. So I've cleared them all out, and then I've specifically added in the ones that I want. They are still there. We've just filtered them out of the visual display of the data at the moment. So that's sort of walking us through. Next, we want to plot the mean day length. And so we're going to put that on the y-axis, and we're going to put month on our x-axis to try to get a sense of what's going on. And then, we've got some dots going in, some strange places. To me, it kind of looks like a star always. So this is a great time to use to leverage the color feature to get a sense of, it's not actually a star. These are from our 2 different locations that we just collected. And you know what? Actually, the months are connected, and we can presume that while we did not take data while we are looking at the monthly averages of the data, that it's highly likely that the amount of day length that would happen sort of between April and May would be somewhere along this line. So we can use that line, the line graph by categories, to really get a sense. And then our questions are really prompting students to think about, okay, so what do you see? Like, what is the shape of the curve? Are they similar? Are they different? What are the maximum and minimums at these different places? So we're calling their eye in to some of these surface attributes, some of these components, as a way to start laying those stepping stones down for them to make sense of, oh, maybe things are different across two different locations. Just as a point of clarification, when you see these solutions, we in the teacher view can jump in and get a sense of what kinds of things we might be expecting to see. We've got some, let's make sense of what we see. Then we've got some, okay, but maybe let's make some predictions off, right? So we're not only, what is the graph? What does it show you? What does it mean? But it's okay, let's think about what the graph is. Let's adjust, let's tinker with it. Let's make it something sense. Let's make some predictions. Let's explain our reasoning behind those predictions. And then let's change it up. Let's look at something new. This is how we can layer in a bit more of those opportunities to engage with the data to get a deeper understanding, a more nuanced understanding of this really big concept of climate and how climate varies across our globe. So here, we're not interested, we've looked at mean day length, now we want to look at mean temperature. And so we're going to grab our mean temperature, and we're going to change it up, and then we're going to see, oh, like, okay, for those two locations that we were still looking at, now what do we see? How does that relate? What's the difference? What's the similarities? What are factors that might affect this? So we gave students one attribute to look at. Now we've looked at another attribute, gotten them to think about sort of similarities and differences, and now we're trying to get them to think sort of broadly. What might it be? What might be going on within these data? We're having them look at nonlinear data. We're having them think about what is the pattern that's getting revealed and making sense of it and thinking about how, what we could take away from that. Then we can throw in something really different to get at, kind of like what we were doing in the kickoff activity, where we can make it into a map. Now, here's the base thing. If they go to a map, they might get something funny like this, and that's okay, right? That's totally fine. We can just reset and change things up. So we can drop our latitude, we can drop our longitude, we can click into the map. Yes, you can actually do that on that bivariate plot because that is exactly what we are doing in our maps. We can click on locations, we can see all those locations showing up, different things like this. So all to say, we've specifically tried to design the activities in this climate change collection data set. I'm trying to get back to where it was. In the collection, so that it adds more nuance. It adds more layers. It adds just in time. Okay, let's look at another attribute. Let's think about what might be a limitation of this graph of what we can say. Let's look at another attribute or another characteristic, another factor that might be influencing it. So of these data stories and activities, and just a reminder, a data story is intended to be 10, 15 minutes to play around with what it, to practice the skill or practice one component of working with data. Whereas the activities are designed to take a lesson or two or a period or two, and they're designed to go more deeply into both the content and the practicing of working with the data. And so the collection, the middle school climate collection, is not a check all that apply of everything climate related within Tuva, but is a purposefully curated set of activities around these 4 specific topic areas that we feel that the activities and the data stories have been purposely designed to offer this more nuanced experience and opportunity for the learners to dive more deeply in to the content, to get more from it. So there are a range of activities that are based on that are kind of to help get at the weather piece and understanding weather and how weather may differ, as well as some climate. This is what I was just sort of to come back to this point of, we have guided activities where they're sort of step by step, like what I was demonstrating of, it prompts the students on what to do to make the interface work, to manipulate the data going through. And then we've got those student directed, which are a bit more open-ended, and the students are driving the ship. So of your 27 students, they might end up in 24 different places because they made different choices. Some of them will make similar choices, and therefore they line up in similar places. But the data sets are rich enough that the students can actually be making those choices. The student directed are not intended when you're first learning the content or when you're first practicing skills. That's why the majority of our activities are actually in this guided space of, as we are building out our content knowledge and our skills, things like that. So there's a wide range of different types of activities also that we can get at from the climate perspective. And we can think about them of like, different activities help us explore different components to it. And so another thing that I want to point out is, yes, we are curating these collections to be these really rich activities, but we're also keeping an eye towards what are the cross-cutting concepts that are coming up, that we are creating opportunities for students to get a range of opportunities across different cross-cutting concepts. What are a range of different aspects of these content areas that we can provide for students? So yes, they're getting orbital patterns on reasoning about seasons, but we can also be getting at orbital patterns from the like, why aren't winters cold everywhere? Same topic, same concept that we're working on, but from two different directions. This is the equivalent of, we do bicep curls, we do chin-ups, we do push-ups, all to strengthen our arm muscles. How can we create opportunities using real-world data to get at some of these harder concepts to kind of wrap our brains around from different perspectives, from different angles? That's helpful for the learners. And also it's helpful for us as the facilitators of their learning, because maybe this activity just doesn't actually align well enough with your curriculum, but this one gets at it better. So we're trying to create a bit of redundancy in there for two reasons. One, to create opportunities to iterate and practice and repetition for your students. We know, right? That's what good pedagogy tells us. We need to practice and we need to try things over and over again and come at things at different times. And that's how it actually starts to seep in and integrate. We've also created that redundancy to assist you with how that goes with your lesson planning, how it fits into the rest of your curriculum, right? Tuva is a supplemental. It's supporting all the amazing things that you're already doing. It's this wonderfully rich add-on into what you have. So we're trying to balance lots of those different pieces for you. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind as you're looking through this collection, to think about, okay, well, I'm doing seasons. I'm just going to jump into this seasons. Well, could you maybe this season's on tomorrow and then this on Monday in a bit of spiraling? Could this be an activity that you offer to one group of students and this be an activity you offer to another, to give them some time to like really hone in and insist on something, where some of your other students are ready to keep moving? They all need to be on seasons. They need to be on similar things. So those are some opportunities that we're trying to create within these collections, creating that versatility and opportunity for you. So we've looked a lot at this first collection, this first section in the collection. I want to draw your attention to some of the great resources that are in this Explore Global Changes section. And there's two more amazing sections coming. So there are some really rich data sets that you can use that can augment maybe some data that you're already using, or some content, text, prose, reading, videos that you're already incorporating in. So there's a zooming in on CO2, where the students get to look at carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from ice cores, right? We so often look at the Mauna Loa graph, which is a phenomenal graph, and those data are in here as well. But how cool to look at that from a different perspective. Or how cool to look at, okay, so we look at atmospheric carbon dioxide. Now let's look at ocean pH. And let's think about how we monitor and what that impact might be on others. Or how is Arctic sea ice coverage changing? Or wildfires. What we've tried to do also within this collection is create a variety of different phenomena, a variety of different situations in which we are in this section seeing how things are changing across the globe to create opportunities either for local connections, if that's relevant, if you live in any of these local places, or to have, again, sort of a wider range of options to spark that curiosity and that relevance for your learners, that authenticity within it. So these are a variety of the things that are going on as we're thinking about populating this collection to help you create those opportunities to dive more deeply into the data to teach the content, the climate content, but also at the same time to build the students' competence and confidence and ability with those science and engineering practice skills, as well as their ability to really integrate those cross-cutting concepts. Tuva's designed so that you can use it in person, hybrid, or remote learning. And let's hope none of us go back to fully online remote learning ever again. But it works really well. One thing that I do want to call out that we have seen, that we see across the board, across all of our different classrooms as our learners are working with the Tuva interface, and especially with content like climate that can have lots of different geographic scales, spatial scales, that can have lots of different time scales, that can be like asking our students to like think and connect these really big concepts that can be sometimes pretty challenging to wrap our heads around. Partner coding or partner work around a computer can be a really helpful strategy to set students up for more success. What does that look like? Well, you've got two learners around one computer. One is driving the ship and they are actively dialoguing with one another of what should do. Now, the key thing is that the person driving the ship is not the one doing all of the talking as well. And that the other person just gets to sort of sit off to the side and disengage. If you are seeing that, what can be really helpful is that the person driving the ship is not allowed to do anything until their partner sitting next to them tells them what to do. What it can create are opportunities, those in real time, sort of just as needed opportunities for peer-to-peer instruction, for them to answer each other's questions, for them to think about it, for them to encourage them to talk out loud and actively engage in the process of making sense of data. Those things that really help us as we are learning and making sense of pieces. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about and exploring this climate collection for middle school. Before we wrap up, I just want to share out a couple things. So as always, you can always come into our science content library and look for specific climate related activities within here. And you can do it, you can search by grade bands to get down to just our middle school activities. You can then just search through each of these tiles, or you can jump in more specifically and look through for specific performance expectations that you might be interested in, or you can jump in and go by topic area down to look for, let's say you really want something for climate change, things like that. So just to say, like, although things are getting put in the collection, they're not going away here in the content library either. So definitely jump in and check out the content library to find those resources. And if you have a data set that you really enjoy and works really well with your students, you just want them to be able to like engage with it a little bit more, remember, you can always upload data. Just as sort of a quick reminder, there are two ways that we can upload data into Tuva. We can either do an import of a data set that we already have. So be it you've got it on your Google Drive, it's a Google Sheets file. It's an Excel file that you've got on your computer, or you are a Microsoft 365 and you're going to upload it from your OneDrive, wherever it is. You can upload an existing data set from any one of these places into Tuva, into your Tuva library, and it will show up in your My Datasets library. Okay, yours will look different than mine because you will have different data sets that you have uploaded, but that is where you find them. The other one is that if your learners are doing a hands-on investigation to get at whether, or even maybe to like get at some aspects of climate in different regions, then they can just insert their data in real time. We've got lots of tutorials and support pages for you on how to insert your data, as well as when you're importing data, when you're uploading an existing data set, how those data need to be organized so that it will successfully import into Tuva. Those resources are available in 2 different places. So we've got our help desk, which you can always come to, our help support resources, and you can jump in here. There's a whole section on uploading data into Tuva. This is a really key, amazing feature. So I encourage you, if you're not using it, please leverage it. It's a great aspect of getting all the benefits of these tools and features. All of those, remember, scientists use tools and technology to help them make sense of data. All of this can be at your disposal with those data sets that you have. So you can get to it from the help side and land in our Tuva support resource. You can also get to it from the dashboard, from here in the PDF. And we've got some various different webinars where we've talked through it previously, and some connection videos, different things like that as you're making sense. There are a variety of different tutorials that Tuva has. So this would be another great place where you could jump in, where you're like, my students are struggling with like making different charts. 1, you can reach out to me, but 2, or hello@tuvalabs.com. But 2, we've got these tutorials to also jump in to provide some supports in real time. So as we are kind of heading out the door and thinking forward into the next place of where we are going, I encourage us to think about sort of like, okay, so what are some thoughts that we have? How could we use Tuva differently? How could we leverage this middle school climate collection to help our students dive more deeply into these climate topics? Just like last time, I'm going to pause for a minute so you can think about it. I encourage you to drop it in the chat if you'd like, or just think about it to yourself. But before we walk back to the rest of our day, let's take a few moments to pause and think about, okay, so how are we going to do this? What's going to be our next step? Oh, love it. Fantastic. Okay, so a minute is not long enough, but that got some juices flowing of some ideas of how we could take forward. Just a reminder, use the resources that we're providing for you and reach out. We email weekly with like new resources that are coming on through the platform that you can use. This is my email address. Please feel free to reach out if you've got any questions. It was wonderful working with you all today. I wish you the best rest of your day, and thank you so much for all that you do every day. Bye-bye.